Is approval of the minutes for March 12th. The committee assistants sent them out. Do I have a motion? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move approval of the minutes for March the 12th.
A second by the Vice Chairman. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The minutes pass. All right, committee, we're going to move on to our other, okay. We're going to move on to our other business for today, which is a informational hearing on SB 366. And Mr. Advisor, could you give us a rundown on what's in that bill?
Mike Heim with the Revisor of Statutes Office. This bill amends a statute dealing with advanced voting ballots, and it does several things. If you turn to page 4 of the bill, the first thing is it changes subsection K, any person who solicits by mail registered voter to file an application and so on shall include a clear, conspicuous label, 12-point font or larger. Current law says 14-point. I'm not sure what the, if that's a significant change there. On the exterior of the mailing, or at least one page containing such mailing, and so on, and it also has to have a clear statement, disclosure on page 5. This is not an official government mailing. The provisions of this does not apply to the Secretary of State or the county election officials and so on. It also provides that on page 5 that no county election officer or employee of a county election officer shall mail or cause to be mailed an application unless it's solicited, so on. So no portion of the application can be completed prior to the mailing and so on. And the third thing the bill does is it strikes an existing language. Any individual may file a complaint with the Attorney General alleging violation and so on, and any person who violates this provision is subject to a civil penalty of $20 per violation. That's stricken. There's a district court case, I believe, that has got that on hold. I think maybe the conferees can give you more information about that court case, but the bottom line is it's been found to be not to be valid. Let's put it that way.
Are there any questions for Mr. Heim about what's in the bill? Okay, seeing none, you're off the hook. Thank you very much. All right, so committee, we don't have any in-person proponent testimony, but we do have a lot of written proponents. I'd direct your attention to that testimony. And is there anybody wishing to speak as a proponent? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to our neutral testimony, and the one conferee I have listed is Mr. Brian Caskey. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Proctor and members of the committee. And thank you for allowing us the opportunity to comment on Senate Bill 366. Our office is neutral on this legislation, but I do have a handful of comments I'd like to point out. Whether county election officers should be prohibited from sending unsolicited mail ballot applications is a policy decision best left to the legislature. We do, however, encourage the committee to listen to concerns of county election officers, as they are the only officials tasked with conducting elections and are best positioned to identify unintended consequences of this bill. For years, some counties in Kansas have routinely mailed out advanced ballot applications to voters as part of their standard procedure without issue. Our interpretation of the bill is this. One, it would not prohibit a county from sending an election information notice that includes a website or other method for a voter to request a mail ballot application. 2, it would not affect our current procedures as it relates to permanent advanced voters. And 3, it would not affect our current procedures with UOCAVA voters, which are members of the military and overseas citizens. Senate Bill 366 does align with guidance that the Secretary of State's office and Secretary Schwab have given the 4 election commissioners for the 2024 elections. Our guidance was to those 4 offices, do not send out mail ballot applications unless the voter has requested. So this bill aligns with the guidance that we've given the 4 commissioners. Concerns have been raised regarding personal identifiable information that is on the pre-printed applications, and that information can appear in the hands of someone other than the voter. So we have heard concerns about that. It is important to note that information on the advanced ballot application does include mostly public information: name, address, political party, date of birth. All of that is public information that you can get from the Secretary of State's office or any county election office. However, the application does require a full Kansas driver's license number or the last 4 social. That information is not public record. I have not seen an advance mailer that has that pre-printed on there in my experience, but I do want to note that that should never appear on one unless the voter puts it there, and that is not public information. And then quickly touching on the court case, there have been concerns raised about the legality of sending out pre-populated advanced ballot applications. That is currently under court injunction. I don't really have much to say about that, but I will say that law and the injunction, it specifically exempted election officials from the prohibition on sending that. So this bill, as it relates strictly with county election officers, would not be impacted by that legislation. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Caskey? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you started out with that this would not prohibit them from sending out applications as it currently stands. And I say that is because some people have requested that because of a disability, or is it that's a permanent thing because of their inability to go and vote and stuff. So what door does that leave open?
My understanding of the bill is that if someone contacts the election office, either the state or locals, that then an application can be sent out. So anyone that calls, texts, emails, and wants an application, that would be honored and the county would send out an application. This bill does not ban that practice. What this bill bans is the county on its own sending out an application without the voter ever asking for it.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a point of clarification.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And well, you answered one question I had already about, because I voted by mail for this upcoming primary. Mail ballots are not my favorite, but you know, there's a need for it sometimes. And so I did it this time, partly because of that and partly just to see how it worked. And I printed off my own application for a ballot. And you mentioned that they could still direct people to the website to do that. And you also mentioned, and I do remember when we passed the bill about if a non-government agency sending something out that they have to have a disclaimer on it saying we're not the government or whatever. And so what I'm asking is, so anyone now, if this were to pass, then anyone else in the world could send a ballot to you except for the county election office or county clerk, right?
All this talks about is the actions of the county election office. It does not address the actions of any third party, political party, NGO. This particular legislation only deals with the actions of the county election office, not outside groups.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, you know, and I think people are doing, you know, providing a good service by encouraging people to get out and vote and doing what they can to help them. But it seems to me like this would kind of be useless if who knows who else is sending out ballots, or ballot applications, I should say. apologize for that. But anyway, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Caskey? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Caskey, in your testimony, you state that this SB 366 aligns with the guidance that Secretary Schwab has given the 4 election commissioners for the 2024 elections. Of course, I know the election commissioners are in the 4 largest counties, and I believe, are they directly appointed by Schwab or by the Secretary of State?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in those 4 largest counties, what this bill entails will already happen because the Secretary of State has instructed them so? Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. I did want to address another question, and this might, I just want to read this. I was going through some of the proponent testimony, and they mentioned we see SB 366 as a step in securing confidence in our election processes because it would stop election officials from mailing applications to voters that are moved or passed away or simply don't exist but are still on the voter rolls. We know these phantom voters exist, as explained by Dakota Davis's testimony given February 1, 2022 in the Fed and State Affairs Committee. Do you have any comment on that? I mean, do you recall that testimony from this Mr. Davis? I mean, do you see, and again, I know you're not a proponent or opponent, but as far as, is there anything about mailing applications that would somehow be jeopardized by folks that have moved away that are still on the voting list?
So I am certain that I have listened and read the testimony, but no offense, but that was over 2 years ago, and I've been concentrating on the election next week. So I don't want to go too far into the details because I want to make sure my memory is correct. But as it relates to sending out applications to voters and phantom voters, Kansas is a voter ID state. So every election, everyone that has sent an advanced ballot application, the voter has to fill out the ID portion of the application. Even if they're pre-printed, the ID portion is not pre-printed. So the voter has to put down a driver's license number or last 4 social on the application. Once the election office receives the application, all of the information on the application is verified, and we have to verify that the driver's license number or last 4 social belong to the name on the application and align with the information we have in our voter registration system. So you have to pass basically a driver's license ID check before we will mail you a ballot. So I believe that that's a pretty good security measure on advanced ballot applications and to prevent so-called phantom voters.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate the input.
Sure.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. 2 things, if I may. Sorry, making myself a note so I don't lose track. So it is my understanding that when a county election officer mails out, let's say they have had the practice or habit in their county of sending out advanced mail ballot, or not advanced, but mail ballot applications to voters in their county, they would, of course, send a ballot application to every single registered voter in their county. And because, of course, obviously they couldn't discriminate on who was most likely to be a voter or anything like that. So they would have to send them to absolutely every registered voter. And, of course, the paying for the printing of those applications and mailing them out would, of course, be covered. The cost for that would be covered by the county taxpayers. Am I remembering anything incorrectly, or any information you'd like to offer about anything being incorrect or additional information?
No, all of that would fall under the operations of the county election office.
Okay. And then my second question is, in your testimony, you referenced that you thought it would be a good idea, which I agreed with you, to confer with the county election clerks or county election officials about this bill and unintended consequences. But as I'm noticing here, as I look through all the opponent and proponent testimony, I don't believe we have a single one that have weighed in by any chance. Do you know, did any of them weigh in at the hearing in the Senate?
I do not remember if they weighed in on the Senate side or not.
Okay, thank you.
But
Any other questions for Mr. Caskey? Okay, I've got a couple if
Sure.
you'll indulge me. So to the question asked by the previous representative, is it a requirement for an elected election officer to send the requests to every, I mean, if they're going to send them out, is there any law that says they have to send them out to everybody, or could they only send them to the registered Republicans, or only send them to the people who usually vote?
there is no law that governs that conduct, so that would be under the policy of the county election officer. Now, I assume that if you target one segment of the population over another, that you would have to have some kind of justification, but I would defer to the county that does that to justify those decisions.
Okay, yeah, because I don't think there isn't a law. I mean, really, unless somebody went to a court, the only accountability they have is at the ballot box when they're up for reelection, correct? Okay, I mean, we all know the reason this bill got filed and what started this whole thing was in Johnson County, the election commissioner sent out ballot applications to every voter. Did he have where they were pre-filled out, were they not?
I do believe that some information was pre-populated on those applications.
But they did not have the driver's license number or last four printed?
Correct, that was not, that was left blank on every single application.
Okay. I think I'll just let that one lie. So in this law also touches the law that's been enjoined about outside parties sending in ballot requests. When the judge enjoined that law, did he also enjoin the part about having to have the label on there saying clearly that this didn't come from a government agency, or do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can quickly get back to you with that. Clay would know off the top of his head, but unfortunately, he's having fun skiing today.
Okay. Our research is saying they don't believe that they did. So my last question, I'll let you off the hot seat here. So, and this may be an unfair question. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer it. If we pass this law, the only people we're prohibiting from sending ballot requests unsolicited are the election officers. Is that good policy?
That is a great question, and one in which I will defer back to you. That's a sound policy decision made by the legislature wherever it ends up.
Okay, I figured I'd give you give it a shot. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Caskey? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your patience with us. I have no other neutrals listed. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as neutral on Senate Bill 366? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to opponent testimony. And the only in-person conferee I have listed is Mr. Davis Hammett. Welcome back to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So I'll start off by saying when this bill was first introduced, I think the conversation even during the introduction of the bill kind of highlights part of our opposition to this, which is that they kept on referring to this, that Kansans were getting unsolicited ballots. And I know this is an issue that we've dealt with, that the Secretary of State's dealt with, that county clerks deal with, that a voter maybe gets an application and then will post on social media that they got a mail ballot, which is inaccurate. And so it causes this sort of misinformation, and then that, I understand how that could cause, doubt in the election process. I know that we've had times where people say that to us, and by the time, we track it down, we're like, that's an application. That's just an application to get the ballot. That's not a ballot. I know this is something I imagine the Secretary of State's office has to spend who knows how many hours chasing down these things to investigate them just to find out that it's just someone got an application. And so I think that is, just a common thing with language that happens too, where people often, when they're talking about advanced ballot applications, they just say advanced ballots, and it causes confusion. So in this, again, I sort of, like previous bills, I think sort of the foundation, the basis, the justification of this is really flawed and misplaced, where something like just voter education is more suited to address these problems than a firm law, and especially this law, because as was said, this will not block anyone else from sending advance mail ballot applications. For example, a political party in Kansas could just send advance ballot applications to all of their party registered members in a specific district, in a specific county. That can still happen. A third party, for whatever reason, can still send ballots to specific groups of people or the entire state, advance ballot applications. I understand how the language gets tricky on that. Advanced ballot applications to a targeted group, and all this will do is say the actual government source cannot send out this application. And it essentially would mean to get a paper application, you would have to apply for the application, which also adds time if you want the county, and it adds cost because the county already has to track the entire process of you getting the application to them. But now they'll have to add the additional step of having people emailing them, asking for applications, entering it into a system, making sure it gets mailed out, the cost of the postage of that, and then tracking it when it gets returned, and then putting it into the current system, which is all additional bureaucracy that the county will have to address. I think even asking, why aren't county clerks speaking on this? Well, we're in a unique moment that hasn't happened since 1992, where the county clerks are spending this time running a primary for the state instead of the political parties. So they're, swamped in this moment. But those are the only people that are being banned from this. I'm actually not that familiar with the lawsuits that were mentioned. In one of our lawsuits, we were actually, this was one of the claims we were suing on, but then the former Attorney General agreed that it was unconstitutional to prohibit the sending of these applications. And so we essentially mooted that part because that claim didn't matter. So that's, third parties can send these applications, but the part that's being appealed by the state is that question of if they can be pre-filled out with some of the voters' information or not. The district judge ruled that that is free speech, that is advocating for advanced ballots by just pre-filling some of the forms, and the state's now contesting that in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's where that lays. But it's sort of irrelevant because, again, if the issue is worrying about voters getting accurate information, this is blocking voters from getting, maybe you got 4 advanced ballot application requests, and all of them are going to have that disclaimer, that says this is not the government, this is not official. But then you got that one that is official, and you can know, well, I can know that this is the right one. This has a government seal. I would also add that when we think about advanced voting too, when counties are planning their election plan, it's about capacity. Because more people use advanced ballots, they do not need to have as many poll sites. And so in Johnson County, for example, there were 213 poll sites in 2016. By 2022, it was down to 142 because they know more voters are voting advance. And they rely on sending out these applications in places like Douglas County, other places that do this every election. They rely on this to offload some of the capacity from election day. If they can no longer send this, if they can no longer rely on that, that means they're going to need to open more poll sites, increase more poll staffing because there will be a higher demand on election day. We saw this play out to some extent in 2022 in Sedgwick County, where a new commissioner did not send out advanced ballot applications, which had been happening for many, many years. And so what happened is all of a sudden there were really long lines, and sometimes people waiting, an hour to vote on election day because the capacity plan just was offset there, and there was nothing filling in that gap. There was no additional election day capacity to address that. And One other aspect that I'll add is unique in crisis situations. Imagine, it's a month, it's 2 months before the election, and a poll site burns down. Something happens, and they can no longer use that poll site where voters have always voted at. Now, to find a compliant poll site that meets the Americans with Disability Act standards, they might not be able to find one, next door. They might have to go kind of far to find a building. And so the county clerk might choose to inform voters that are impacted and say, hey, to vote, you're gonna have to go to this location that's farther away, and then also include an advanced mail ballot application in order to offset that burden that happened outside of the voter or the county's control. And this would basically take that option away, because the county would not be able to send that information. A lot of counties do send before the election information to a voter about, their voting options to vote early, where their polling site is, and then include in that the advanced ballot application if they would like to use it. Sometimes, it's one page front and back. That wouldn't be possible under this bill. And then, of course, as was previously mentioned, more broadly, this is touching on a home rule concern about counties determining what makes sense for them. How do they want to properly address election capacity and voter access to make sure that they don't run into other issues? Because, even in that Sedgwick County election, you had a situation where poll site lines were long, and someone at 7 o'clock when the polls close accidentally shuts the door on voters, which is illegal. And then there's legal actions and, an emergency order to continue the poll sites opening, to keep the poll site open for additional hours because it had been illegally closed. In these sort of situations where counties are much better suited, and we have very different counties, as y'all know. We have counties with hundreds of thousands of people and counties with a couple thousand people. They're gonna have different needs, and taking away this option could cause all sorts of unintended consequences, including the consequences that I've just mentioned here that are generally known. We can expect that if this went into effect for this election, counties are going to have to offset that. Like, mail ballots do cost money to send the application, to mail them out, but opening a new poll site and staffing that poll site and getting new voting machines into a poll site also cost money. Electronic voting machines can be very expensive, and so they're gonna have to figure all that out. So, there's not exactly, it's not like this will just save dollar for dollar the amount of money. More money will need to be spent other ways to compensate for the enhanced election day capacity of voters showing up because they didn't vote by mail. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hammett? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, well, you have many groups that sign up voters, and oftentimes they'll have application for advance ballots there with them. Those would still be legal. You could carry those and have those sent in, is that correct?
As long as you are not a county election official, yes. So if the county election office wanted to have a booth, or maybe that's not right. I would need to read the language. If it's just mailing, I guess maybe they could have it at person in a community event, so.
You could bring them with you, and if the person asked for an advance ballot, you could give it to them. You just couldn't give it to them if they didn't ask, I would imagine.
Well, because oftentimes, and I ask this question because when you're campaigning and going door to door, they may be a registered voter, but then they say, I need to get an application for a mail-in ballot. They have to say that to us first. We can't offer it to them.
This law only applies to election officers, so clerks or election commissioners. It would not apply to you as a candidate. You could give it to them even if they didn't ask for it.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that didn't seal off. Thank you.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. So following my the former representative's thought process, it does immediately bring an unintended consequence perhaps to this, and that is, unlike Sedgwick County, being one of the counties where we have an appointed election commissioner, all the county clerks at the other 101 counties are county clerks who are elected. So what we're saying is a state representative could go door to door and carry mail ballot applications in their backpack and hand them to whoever they wish, okay? But the county clerk, who's also going door to door to get reelected, could not do so. So that's a little interesting little thought for us all to think about.
And if I may, I think I might actually be wrong on that, just reading over the bill, I need to confirm, but I think it's actually saying shall mail or cause to be mailed, so maybe, I think you could maybe have them in person at a community event, or if they were a candidate, the county clerk, door to door, but I don't want to, does that?
Supervisor Heim, do you
seem right?
have an opinion on this?
Oh, okay.
The question is what? I'm not clear.
The
Can a
question
county
is,
election officer that's running for election carry ballots with them?
no, the question was, does this bill only apply to the mailing of ballot requests, or is it also the handing out or distribution by other means?
I see it as mailing. I don't see it as the other. I would make a comment if I could. The county home rule statute specifically excludes elections, so I'm not clear how much leeway a county clerk has in terms of election administration and so on. I think they need to be able to point to a specific statute in order to do something, so for whatever it's worth.
Any other questions for Representative Oropeza?
I have a quick question. So is the only way to get an advanced ballot application to email technology, or could you call? And do you see any indication in this bill, like if a person was not technology equipped or up to date, would be able to call in and still get a mailed application?
So I think it just, it doesn't define that, I don't believe. It just says requested. So theoretically, it could be a phone call to the county elections office. But I don't think that is defined in the bill, so I'm not sure exactly the parameters of requested. I think that would work, but I would imagine under the law, the county would then have to have a system to maybe say how that was requested to make sure that they complied with this. So be able to say you called and requested it, you emailed and requested it, whatever it was.
So putting additional work on election officers and county clerks to
Yes.
follow this information, to follow how it was done.
Yes, it would just be an additional process for them to track for the application for the application.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Hammett. Let me see, one or two questions. Of course, you would have, would you not, if this bill was passed statewide, that if a person did get an advance mail ballot application, they would know it's always coming from some partisan group. You know, I mean, that it would simplify it, that whether it's official county versus some outside group, it would just always be from an outside group, which, you know, I think from a voter standpoint, you know, whoever's sending it to you, you know, has some sort of interest, that it would be, you know, that you wouldn't be confused between official mail and unofficial. I mean, do you not see that as being maybe helpful for voters?
I think that is maybe possible. I would say you don't have to be a partisan group to send this, right? I mean, you could even be the head of your neighborhood association, and you just say, I want to mail everyone in the neighborhood an advance mail ballot application, right? Regardless of party or anything else. So it wouldn't necessarily mean that really that an advance ballot application really signifies anything except for that you're not an election official. But of course, that is expecting quite a bit of voters to be able to follow that. And I guess, again, though, these applications being sent out, if whoever did it, right? If the application is sent out, the application needs to be returned to the elections office, and there's a legal issue if they do not facilitate that. So it's not like a third-party group inherently means anything nefarious is happening.
Okay. So, you mentioned in your testimony about, misinformation, and I can certainly see that. I mean, I've literally had people chase me down the street when I'm going door to door saying, why are they sending me so many ballots? And it's like, they're not ballots, these are just applications. But still, I mean, I will just testify that the concern of the individual was dead serious. I mean, they were really, ticked off about it, and just really thought, it was just like, I don't know, like the democracy had gone out to, people were just sending out ballots, and this is just all crazy, and just, anyway, but I would grant you that probably 99% of what people experienced the last election or two were people who just, it was an application for a ballot that came to your college student son or, whatever, who hasn't lived there for 10 years. It wasn't a literal ballot. But at the same point, I do want to ask you, in your testimony, as far as misinformation, since this bill appears to target Johnson County, I guess in the earlier testimony from the Secretary of State's office, they said they've already issued instructions for the 4 counties that they control, which is Johnson County, to not send out these, not to have the county send them out. And so is it not true that really Johnson County is kind of not even relevant in here, because that's the Secretary of State's issue and not an SB 366 issue?
So I think that touches on another topic that gets pretty wild in Kansas law, which is the appointed elections commissioner and who they're beholden to. So the Secretary of State, once your county passes a certain threshold, then no longer do the people of the county get to select their election official. The Secretary of State does, and they appoint them. The level of control that the Secretary of State exerts over them, I think might be up for debate. And I know that even so I live here in Shawnee County, and there was an issue a handful of years ago because the county actually, even with the elections office that's appointed by the Secretary of State, the county commission actually funds everything. And so there was a situation where the county commission was reducing the pay of the appointed election commissioner, and I forgot how all that played out, but it was some drama around this of how we have this odd legal structure where the Secretary of State appoints them, unclear of the exact level of control they have over them. Of course, they can just not reappoint them, and then how that plays in with the fact that the county commission actually determines if things get funding and for what, like approves their budget.
Again, I guess my ultimate point is just in relevance to your testimony that really, Johnson County, Sedgwick County, they're already operating under this, effectively, this 366, at the request of the Secretary of State, who has legal authority to do so.
So on that point, and sorry to not get to that, my brain just kind of lit up because that area of law, as I said, is sort of weird, the appointment of elections commissioners. But for that, so Johnson County had done it, and now it is my understanding they were advised by the Secretary of State that their position is not to do it. I do not know, if that is binding and they can fully prevent them, or if they would intend to do it. I can say that raises concerns, or even I just took note of that to look into it, right? If we see long poll sites or long election day sites, just to be frank, I might attribute this to this decision that the Secretary has made. And that's concerning, right? Because if you're taking away an option to offload that, and if you are not increasing capacity somewhere else, you're setting yourself up for potential problems, especially in a presidential election year.
And I'd just say, because people watch these things, this would not take away mail-in voting. It would just take away the option for the election officer to mail out the ballot request to everybody. So I just want to make sure we had that on the video correctly. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, in listening to what you said and the questions of Representative Wagner and stuff, are we creating a problem or looking for a problem that doesn't need necessarily to have a statute for this? And the reason I ask that is somewhere in all of this, our public has to want to be educated. And we have access to the applications on our computers, but not everyone has a computer or is technology literate to know how to pull it off. Is there a way through, our Secretary of State's office or whatever, that some of these can be posted before elections to say, if you get this in the mail, this is only an application. You don't have to fill this out. But if you want a mail-in application, but it's not like you're getting 3 ballots because the names aren't on there. But somewhere people do not understand. We're aware of what each one of the forms look like, but that's because we look at it all the time. They don't. And it's very simple to tell when they go in and vote and they go, well, I don't know what all I'm voting on. Well, did you take the time to look it up? Have you looked, at who's available and stuff to know the process? And it's just like what we've done as a process this year in looking at voting machines and the safety and how the processes go through. We could go through and say we've been to 3 or 4 of them, and they're pretty much the same depending on the demographics. So our comfort level may be a whole lot different than one who just goes in once every year or twice, whatever, and punches that button and has no understanding. Because the one thing that we've concluded this year is that every machine is a paper ballot. And how many people have said, I want a paper ballot? What kind of paper ballot? You want one where you mark or where you pull it out and you can look at it and stuff? I think our public is either very naive or does not understand the process and the different forms. And that could be for many reasons, many reasons. So is this really a problem that we need to try to fix, or do we need to fix it in a way that people become more knowledgeable and educated? Because the answers are there. It's just how you get there, to me. Would that be?
Yeah, so on one part of that, I would say that to my knowledge, again, I don't have, every time a county has done this, but when counties do send out mailers like this, for example, in Douglas County, which regularly does it, it might say, as I said, if you want to vote on election day, it's like this. If you want to vote early in person, it's like this. If you would like to get your ballot sent to you at home, you may fill out this form. It's not saying you have to vote this way. And I would believe, not attempting to imply that on voters and usually being very clear. And I think if that was an issue that we saw, right, if voters were getting something from a county saying you must vote by mail to do this, I think that would be a legitimate issue to address in a bill. But I agree that I think that just the foundation of this is not an actual problem to be solved by law. It's a voter education issue that can be done by, county clerks, by really, frankly, all of us trying to take on the responsibility of, when we hear someone saying something like that we know to be inaccurate, to say, hey, I understand why you might have thought that. That's actually just an application. Open it up, look at it, there's no one to vote for, and help walk them through that. to debunk that, because election misinformation, misunderstanding has been around since the beginning, and it will probably be here till the end of time. And all we can do for some of these is just to try to address them best, but taking away the official government source of an application, I think is not the best way to go.
So I'd say two things. The first thing is I hope that these hearings are a way to help educate the public. And, you know, I've tried to have hearings on bills some bills I knew were never going to leave this committee, but I knew they would foster the conversation to educate the public. The second thing I'd say is we've gone almost a whole year without anybody saying this is a solution in search of a problem, but that was a dangerously close call that we just had with Representative Neighbor. So we're almost there. So I have, to that point though, of, you know, what are we trying to solve? The people that talked to me about this bill were not confused that ballots were being sent out. They were concerned that an unelected official, they're great folks, but they're not elected, they're not accountable to the voters, were, in their mind, putting their thumb on the scale because one party has a higher propensity to vote by mail than the other. And so it's one thing if the Democrat Party or a candidate sends targeted mailers to people that he or she thinks will vote for them or their party, and you know, with a ballot application to get a ballot, because they had to spend money to do that, right? They had to make an investment of their campaign funds to do that. If a unelected election commissioner uses public funds to send a ballot application to every single voter, just statistically, from the last few elections, one party is going to vote by mail a lot more than the other. And so their concern is that this is using public money to put the thumb on the scale in favor of one party. What is your response to that?
So I think it's an interesting thing, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because it's something I think a lot about on some of the recent bills that we've seen, which is that no voting method is inherently beneficial to any political party over the span of time. So, for example, several, I believe at least two, but maybe several of the current U.S. Supreme Court justices that are conservatives appointed by Republican presidents actually worked on trying to cure mail ballots in Florida during a Bush election, right? Because mail ballots used to be widely seen as overwhelmingly benefiting Republicans not that many years ago. Now, following the pandemic, you get a skewed thing that really plays into a lot of other factors around responses to the pandemic, but now, you know, it might be viewed as favoring Democrats. It's my understanding that that sort of partisan reality is really quickly fading away. You know, it might vary place to place. But that's to say that when it comes to methods of voting aren't inherently partisan either direction. There might be a culture or an ideology of a party in any given moment that encourages or discourages a method. For example, we talk about ballot harvesting. There's some states, I think like Nevada, where the National Republican Party and the State Republican Party is like, we got to harvest ballots. We got to be out there harvesting ballots. And here, you know, the Republican Party is like, ballot harvesting is the worst thing that could happen. So things can vary a lot, and no method itself inherently benefits or hurts a political party. Into that too, even as I'm, you know, was saying, where if they're going to take away this option, they really need to increase election day capacity. You know, it's not some given that inherently voting on election day means you're more likely to vote Republican or Democrat. You know, in 2020, there could have been a chance that, you know, it correlated there, but that doesn't mean that's how it is even a year later. And that's my concern with this overall is, for example, Sedgwick County, I think it was since 2006, they had been sending out advanced ballot applications to every voter, and frankly, no one really cared. You either used it or you threw it in the trash, the application, and no one cared, and then it became an issue. And now it's viewed as partisan. And that's my concern, is sort of no method. The game is not the election system, right? The game is the campaigns and folks battling out their ideas and their ground game and trying to reach voters. It is not how voters vote. It should not be the method. This stuff of, if it's mail voting, if it's voting early in person, if it's voting on election day, those should not be viewed as games. And for many of these counties, for example, they've done it for a long time and now it becomes controversial in this context. So I would sort of, in that context, I would rebut that if the concern is that sending advanced mail ballot applications is partisan now, that concern itself would be partisan, right? I think it's sort of one of these ironies that we've talked about before on some other bills, where if you're trying to stop something because you think it's benefiting a specific party, that means you are trying to benefit a specific party on the other side.
Representative Essex and the neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. I think there's two different things we're talking about. So first of all, having the advanced voting ballots mailed is one thing, but I think the whole, at least the people that I talk to, are the fact that it's pre-filled out. So if I see one on the ground that somebody dropped, or I rob a mailbox, or I don't know what the options could be, right? Then I'm like, oh, I all of a sudden have a name and an address. And, I think the concern is that that information is out there. I don't know if it would be more helpful if we do these advanced ballots, if they do have permission to send them out, if Secretary of State approves it for our election officers, just that they're not pre-filled out, might help with some of that voter confidence. That's the side that I'm hearing, is that it's filled out.
So thank you for that question. And I would say there are a couple elements to that. If you're dropping on the ground, when it comes to your name and address, postal carrier could drop any piece of mail on the ground, right? And it's going to have your name and address. For the other aspect of this, part of the reason that things are sent out pre-filled with that information is because it rapidly increases government efficiency. So it reduces the waste, because I have terrible chicken scratch hand reading. I'm right now looking at my notes and I'm like, what point was I trying to make? I cannot read it. And I can't imagine if every time I wanted to request an advanced mail ballot, the folks at the Shawnee County Elections Office had to be like, what is this? What name is this? What is any of this information? And that's actually a common issue we see in other things, like hand-filled out voter registrations can be, as much as 25% less likely to get processed simply because the county election office, no one can actually read it. And so this, having it pre-filled out means the county really quickly can identify stuff and enter in information. And so it really is a government efficiency thing, I think, when it comes to that. So I guess I understand the concern. I think that's why, too, the information that would actually make you vulnerable to identity theft, like your social security number, like your driver's license, is not included on these. But a lot of that other information, too, I get that people might be uncomfortable, but it's information that's widely available in tons of public records and tons of places.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you. This is a question, and because several of our school districts now are doing or when they do a bond election, they now do it by mail-in ballots because they want to get more they want to be able to count more votes and get a better judgment of the approval rate. Would this interfere with that? Because I don't know if they send those out with everybody's name on them or not, but they send them to, only those that can vote on
Mr. Heim, would you like to
the
take
bond
a
issues.
crack at that?
I think the mail ballot election law is an entity in and of itself, and those rules would apply. This advanced ballot section, I don't think, other than it would not prevent, I may be wrong about this, but I think the the idea is that ballots would be sent to all registered voters for the mail ballot purpose.
I think this only applies to ballot requests, not to ballots. So for like a bond issue where it's an all mail, all by mail election, I think this would not affect your ability to just send a ballot to every voter for the bond
Okay,
election.
but then the discussion earlier was the 4 major areas have been told not to do that.
Ballot requests, not ballots. So I think they could still mail ballots for a
They can mail the
municipality
ballot,
for,
not the
not the requests, yes.
Clarity, thank you very much.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to have phone a friend watching the Elections Committee today, otherwise known as my county commissioner husband, because we all know. Okay, so I'm just going to say it, okay? This has been a topic that has been hotly debated in our family and some of my family members, because as most of you also know, my sister used to be the election commissioner for Sedgwick County also. And my sister and my husband were on opposite sides of this argument for years, and probably still are, actually. So, but everybody still loves each other. So, but just some information here. Jim is saying that we added 30 new poll sites this last year in Sedgwick County, and it cost us $30,000. And that includes paying the election workers. For reference, mailing out ballot applications to everyone was $130,000 that the taxpayers paid for. So, and just so you know, I haven't decided where I personally am on this topic, but just passing that on. So,
Feeling you're going to be lobbied when you get home. Any other questions for Mr. Hammett? We still got one more conferee here. I want to give her plenty of time. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I have one opponent on WebEx, Aaron Woods. Are you there?
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can. Please proceed. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Erin Woods, and I live in Johnson County. And I'm here to urge you to vote against Bill SB 366, as it would prevent our local election offices from providing comprehensive voter education by mail. So kind of touching on some of those questions that you all have had. I volunteer with the Voter Turnout Project in Kansas. And from that project, I've learned 2 things. Many people I know do not vote in every election, and more people vote when they understand the voting process. The volunteer work I do requires one thing, and that's educating voters on the voting process to make it as simple as possible for them to make a plan to vote. So in doing that work, to encourage people to vote, I share things like advanced in-person voting info, how to find a sample ballot, where to find an advanced ballot application, the deadlines for submitting those applications, and the first day ballots are sent out. I receive a lot of positive feedback from people telling me the information I shared really helped them to make a plan to vote. And everything I share with them is publicly available, but it's just not at their fingertips when they need it. So all of this is to say how excited and impressed I was when I found a comprehensive voter guide from the Johnson County Election Office in my mailbox before the most recent local election. I was so impressed that I actually kept my voter guide, and I've attached that copy to my written testimony. So you all can take a look at that and see everything that was included in that flyer they sent out. So, and every piece of information I share with voters was now on their kitchen counters in that one handy flyer. So they didn't have to find the website or navigate multiple tabs to learn about their voting options or potentially miss deadlines. Every voter in my house received one of those, and it was a great reminder to my son, who is heading off to college in a few weeks, to fill out his application. As I'm sure everyone on this committee supports increasing voter turnout, I'm guessing the main concern with this bill is trying to address potential fraud, which seems like from the discussion that is a concern. But I would stress that there should be no concerns with that. in the current, with sending those ballot applications out. So our local election offices in Kansas have controls in place for advanced ballot applications and the ballots themselves. And those same controls are in place whether a voter requests an application or whether they received it in the mail from the election office. The advanced ballot application we received in the mail was no different than one that we could have pulled off of the election website. All of those same fields were filled in and not filled in. When my son filled out his application, he still had to enter his driver's license number and sign the application, as has been discussed already. The election office then, of course, had to follow those same signature matching process with his application as they did on those applications that people requested directly from them. And in fact, I can attest that they do this because they rejected my daughter's application the year before when they felt like her signature didn't match her voter registration card. So our election offices have the necessary controls in place to ensure voting by mail is a secure method of voting, whether the application was sent by the election office to the voter or the voter requested it. And I believe we should not be legislating the manner in which a local election office chooses to educate voters on their options for voting, whether it be via their website or in the mail. And like I said, this is you can see right here, I don't think there was any, I know that was concern on some people's part that perhaps the election office was trying to put a thumb on trying to increase mail ballot requests. But, this flyer on the very first page, when you opened it, it gave you all 3 different options for voting. One was vote by mail. Then they talked about voting early in person and then voting on election day. And as you opened up the flyer, it had the application, and then it had this other page, the second page, which has the, not very good at showing that in my camera, but the second page had all the advanced voting locations, the hours, the times, and then on the back side was your election day polling location. So it was just a wonderful comprehensive guide that I think, as we're talking about, I think Representative Neighbor was talking about educating voters, and I really think this was the best thing I have ever received from the election office, knowing what I know about voting because of my volunteer work versus what I know the voters don't know. So it was really helpful, and I encourage you to vote no on SB 366.
All right, are there any questions for Ms. Woods? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Woods, I very good testimony. I really appreciate you sending in this Johnson County guide. I guess you mentioned in your testimony that you're a volunteer with the Voter Turnout Project. So you pretty much help you set up things at grocery stores, you get people to register, you go door to door. If you don't mind me asking, how involved are you?
I'm involved. It's the Voter Network, and it really is just, it's kind of just about contacting the people in your network, people you know, and encouraging them to vote. And the best way to encourage them to vote we've found is just to make sure they understand the process and, where they can go to get some of the information that helps them navigate that process. And we really find just by sharing that information, that some people don't necessarily have at their fingertips, that it really helps them to get out and vote.
Okay, if I could follow up. So I would wonder, as being, a little bit of at least a voting activist person, that does it not make your job easier, this being sent out? I mean, as far as people, you could already reference, it went out in the mail. You could talk to people. It might still be on their kitchen table. And does it not in some ways kind of facilitate what you're doing on the taxpayer? I presume it does.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I was so excited that I kept my copy, because I thought it was that good. That it literally is all the information down to, you need to have your driver's license. It tells you where to go to find a sample ballot. Like, it has all of the things that I share, and usually I share it over a course of a couple weeks leading up to the election. So, when the deadline's approaching, for, or the polls are about to open for early voting, then I may, tell people about that. As soon as the sample ballot's available, I may tell people about that. But absolutely, I actually did refer to this with some people to say, hey, did you get that in the mail? And
Sure.
it's very good. And
Well, again, I mean, I suppose it would be available for voter projects, from whatever political direction, but it does, I would think it would make your work a lot easier. My one sort of final follow-up question is just, did it concern you? It looks like you had to cross off that this advanced application actually also had your date of birth. I mean, do you not think that's sort of extra information you wouldn't necessarily want to have floating out there, that isn't a bit much?
I mean, I do know that, people could Google and find that. I don't think that's hard. But if there was, one thing to change, it really didn't bother me too much, but I could see that being one item to change. But the name and address and things like that, that would be on the normal voter card that I would receive in the mail and really any piece of mail. But, I was just happy that the driver's license field, you had to fill that in. And of course, the signature.
Okay. Anyway, no, thank you very much.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that gets that excited about informing voters. So I'm glad to have company. Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The date of birth, that does kind of alarm me too, but it is available on the, if you look up a person's voter registration on the website, that's available there. So but like I said, that is something that I find alarming. So who knows, maybe in the future we might deal with that. But thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Woods? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony and for speaking to the committee. All right, so I have no other opponents listed to speak in person. We've got a lot of written testimony that I would encourage the committee to take a look at. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as an opponent on 366? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on the informational hearing on this bill. Committee, next week is our last week to meet as a committee before we go back to the floor all day to try to pass all this stuff out. And so right now on the schedule, again, for Tuesday, we have an informational hearing on substitute bill, Senate Bill 249, and on Thursday on 254. If either of those things should happen to get passed on the floor, or if any of these Senate bills happen to get passed on the floor, we will immediately reschedule so that we can try to get them an official hearing and get them worked before the deadline. But it ain't looking good right now based on the pace that's going on over there on the other side of the building. So is there anything for the good of the order before we close the hearing? Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned.